Welcome to the latest episode of the EV Powered Podcast. I'm Matt Allan.
And I'm Richard Alvin. And I think firstly, Matt, we should apologise for a slight hiatus of episodes on this channel. But as we're just about to unveil, we've decided to relaunch this podcast with Matt and I both taking part and then also playing in an interview a little bit later. Today, I'm very pleased that we're going to be joined by Dave Richards, CBE, Chairman of Prodrive and Chairman of British Motorsports, but that's a little bit later on. I think, Matt, the most important thing at the moment in the UK is that we have a new government. Labour appear to be far more proactive on electric vehicles and renewable energy than the Conservatives were. You poured through the manifestos. What do you think we've got ahead of us?
Yeah, I think, as you say, it definitely seems on the surface that there's a more positive attitude towards electric cars than we had under the Conservative government. I mean, I think in fairness, under the last government, in the last 6 months or so, you couldn't be much more negative towards EVs than they were. But yeah, so as you say, Labour have sort of making the right noises in terms of being more proactive towards EVs and more keen to encourage them. I think the biggest thing, and the one that most people are probably most aware of, is that they were talking about the 2035 ban on petrol and diesel cars. And they've said they're going to bring it forward back to 2030, as was initially announced. There was nothing mentioned in the King's speech about that, but it's one of these things that seems to be fairly set in their policies. It's something that we will see. How much impact that's going to have, I'm not entirely sure. I think, as we know, the ZEV mandate says 80% of all new car sales have to be electric by 2030 anyway. And from speaking to car makers, that's what everybody's been aiming for. You know, they're not so concerned with this 2030-35 split. They're more concerned with 2030 target that will see them fined tens of thousands of pounds for selling cars that aren't zero emissions. So that's, I think perhaps that's more a consumer thing. I think people who maybe were thinking they'll leave it till 2035, this putting off moving to an EV, there now it's now from a consumer point of view, they're going to be looking at these cars earlier, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think we've got 6 years until that potentially comes in. And if you look at the raft of cars that have been coming in the last few years, that's going to accelerate. The range is going to accelerate. We're going to have more choice, more sort of price points. So I think actually, for all, it's quite a good headline announcement. The real world implication maybe isn't quite as dramatic as it sounds.
I do think that one of the things that potentially Labour won't do, Rachel Reeves won't be doing, in a similar way that Jeremy Hunt didn't do, that many consumers are pressing for, and that's to do basically a parity between out of home charging, on street charging, which has VAT applied to it, and at home charging, which doesn't have VAT charging, thus making the difference, if you don't have the ability to charge on your own driveway, etc., a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that's quite notable by the fact that Labour haven't made any mention of it, either in their manifesto or in their sort of plan for the automotive sector that they announced at the tail end of last year. I think it's one of those things where realistically it's too expensive for the Exchequer to be knocking 15% off the VAT on public charging, especially as more and more people go electric, more and more people are using the public charging. That revenue stream is going to be hugely important, especially as VAD and fuel duty starts to nosedive. So as much as I think everybody would like to see that, especially people who don't have access to home charging, I find it hard to imagine that Labour will do anything different than their predecessors in that case. I mean, what they have said, which is interesting, is that they want to mandate the number of chargers. Before there was this sort of really, we want 300,000 chargers by 2030. Labour has said that it's going to mandate targets, presumably on an annual basis between now and then, which from an infrastructure point of view, from a certainty point of view, I think it's great news, as long as we actually see some concrete figures at some point. I think as I said, a lot of what Labour have said is very positive. They've talked about charger targets. They've talked about wanting to encourage gigafactories, so big battery factories in the UK to help support the manufacturing process. What will be interesting is to see how they actually manifest that, how we sort of concrete numbers and sort of commitments we see to both those elements, I think.
Matt, you've actually been on a holiday with your family, and thanks to Kia, you actually drove to France in an EV9. So, what was that like?
I mean, in simple terms, it was dead easy. It was brilliant. I mean, the EV9, I have to say, we've got 3 kids, and going on holiday with them is a bit of a chore because they carry so much stuff and they take up so much space. EV9 was frankly brilliant. Like we've done the same trip a few times in different cars, and yeah, it just made it an absolute breeze in terms of the car. I mean, I've done 3,000-4,000 miles in various versions of the EV9 now, and it's a great big thing. You can see why it's won as many awards as it has. But yeah, I mean, the actual experience of going to France in an electric car, it's one of these things that, like I say, I've done a couple of times now. And even now, I mention it to people, even other journalists, and they sort of suck their teeth and go, "Oh, that's going to be difficult, isn't it?" And it just isn't. It's one of these things that people have this impression that, oh God, driving to a foreign country in an electric car, it's also complicated. It's not. It really isn't. It's the experience over there, if anything, is better than it is in the UK, especially doing the auto routes and things. Every service station has half a dozen ultra rapid chargers. You pull up. I used my subscription I've already got for my charging network. Tap your card, away you go. 15 minutes later, you've got 60% added to your car. It's as easy as that. And actually, the one thing I did find is being away from the auto routes, where in the UK sometimes you'll struggle to find decent chargers away from the main roads. In France, you can pull up to a car for a supermarket, bang your car into a 300 kilowatt charger. You pay pennies for it, nip in, do your shopping, come back out, and your car's back up at 80-90%. So it's one of those things that I think there's a perception that it's very difficult. And actually, when you get out there and do it, it's anybody who owns an EV knows that the charging situation isn't as bad as some people make out. And I think it's the same with going to a foreign country, actually. As long as you've got a subscription to one of these sort of cross-network platforms, it's a piece of cake.
Excellent. And whilst you were doing that and enjoying a couple of weeks off with your family, I was nearly killing myself, doing 18,000 steps a day for 3 days running, going to the Goodwood Festival of Speed. And I have to say, the Festival of Speed really has effectively become the pinnacle of British motorsport, British car launches in general, basically.
Yeah.
What was definitely prevalent is the fact that China have definitely well and truly landed. And, there were launches from Honky, Umada, Jayco. I'll say MG cautiously by calling it Chinese, but it is owned by a Chinese company.
Owned by SAIC.
Lotus, Xpeng, just to name a few. And there was a lot of buzz around, and the bulk of launches were electric vehicles of some way, shape, or form, whether it be the Yingwang U8 and the U9. One is a very large SUV, very similar to a Land Rover Defender 110, and the other one is a hypercar. Although there was one slight fly in the ointment to British/Chinese branding, and that's Lotus were desperate to try to get the record for the fastest up the hill from McMurtry. So they had a special Lotus Evija there, and unfortunately within 1.5 seconds of launch it crashed sideways into the hay bales, and a statement from Lotus explains. Basically, they say that the driver turned off the traction control, which sent all 1,257 pounds of torque to the wheels in an instant. And in the first few feet, not meters or yards, the rear wheels were spinning at 170 miles per hour, and the front tyres were only moving at 150 miles an hour. Ergo, the car went sideways. The driver attempted to save the car from spinning by lifting off the throttle, but the balance of the car shifted, which sent it headlong into the hay bales. And once again, this all happened in 1.5 seconds. So, and unfortunately, Lotus weren't able to repair the car in time to do a run on the Sunday. But I think had they done that, and I don't know the exact stats of the McMurtry, driven by Max Chilton at the time, 2 years ago, but I'd hazard a guess that they would be off that slightly.
Yeah.
So I think, it's only a matter of time before Lotus, the Norfolk brand owned by now Geely, actually, does come and take that on.
Does a job. I think in the meantime, they've probably got the fastest crash on the hill climb. the quickest.
Exactly. And I have noticed this morning, whilst I did hear the driver's name at the time, I didn't note it down, and I did try to look it up earlier prior to this recording, and they are just referred to as the driver. They've expunged
the
guilty. Name. Exactly.
It just goes to show what happens when you put 2,000 horsepower and no traction control onto a skinny bit of road, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I have to say that thanks to Honky, they actually took me up the hill on the Thursday in their EHS7 SUV, which is just below 3 tons. The Goodwood driver that was taking me up the hill, it was the same place where I did my driving license, basically didn't exactly fill me with confidence when I first sat in the car, because a little bit of chat as you get to know each other. I said, yeah, "How many times have you driven this car?" "Oh, this will be the first time," he said.
Yeah. It'll be fine.
Exactly. And it was. But anybody that knows the hill, at one point you are nearly kissing a flint wall. And at that point, I think we were probably doing about 80 or 90. I wasn't allowed to, it would have been physically impossible anyway, to actually record the journey up the hill. I did record going down the hill, which is somewhat sedate. You're only doing 30 or 40.
Yeah.
But even then, and we all know electric vehicles are far torquier, regardless of, faster, whatever, than an internal combustion engine. And just literally the immediate power that he would, when he put his foot down, it was there.
Yeah.
The car, because it was an SUV, equally when he whacked on the anchors, it really did nosedive as well. So it was quite a seesawy experience. But yeah, one that was lovely to do. I'd never been up the hill in internal combustion engine car or one of these, so it was lovely. And I thank Honky for enabling me to do it. It's definitely an experience. And something, but yeah, we did it in one something. To be doing it as the McMurtry has done it, and then obviously Lotus are trying to do it in 38, 39 seconds or something. That's
a very different thing. It'll
Exactly.
be interesting though. You say about the Honky, and they've got obviously the SUV that you were up in, but there's also the EH7, which is an Edinburgh postcode, but that's by the by. It's their saloon version, which uses the same platform, so potentially that's going to be a slightly more dynamic, more interesting thing as well, possibly.
Yeah.
With that.
Well, and also it won't be, lugging 3 tons. It'll only be, let's assume, 1.5 or 1.7 or something. I don't know. I don't know what the stats are, but yeah. Also, the interesting thing that what I did notice going around, and linked to EV cars, just linked to cars in general, I think, the fact that Henry Ford used to say you could have any color as long as it was black. Yeah. I didn't see a single black car at Goodwood, at the Goodwood Festival of Speed this time. I saw orange. Polestar were launching their gold car. I'm sure Kanye West or someone like that would like one of those. And also there was some revivals of some classic names as well. Matt, you've got you've been quite close to Ford and their launches, rekindling their reusing their heritage names.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big cars from Goodwood was the new Capri, and it ties into the multicolour rainbow of vehicles. That was the car they sent up the hill. There was a tribute to the signal yellow of the cars from the 70s and 80s. The Capri is an interesting one. I think it's the minute they announced that, and it was been teased for a long time that the Capri name was going to come back, and then they announced it, and of course it's a coupe SUV version. It's a slopey backed version of the Ford Explorer fundamentally, and of course the internet went absolutely mental, and everybody kicked off about how can you use the Capri name. But Ford has a reasoning for this, and it's quite an interesting one that they basically say it costs millions of pounds to create a new model name, a new model brand, if you like, and to try and embed that with public consciousness. And they've said what they're going to do instead is they're going to fall back on these heritage names that we all know, we all have memories of, and they're going to use them because you get that instant recognition. Someone says Capri, you know that's a Ford. Someone said Puma, you know that's a Ford. And it's instantly there. And I don't know, I have conflicting opinions about this because the Capri was a sleek coupe two-door thing. The new Capri looks like a slightly overweight Polestar too. It doesn't stick with the image, but Ford have done it in the past, and with the Puma, everybody kicked off about that because it wasn't the little sporty two-door thing. Puma's now Ford's best-selling car. I don't think people care that it's using a name from a previous one. I think we might find, especially with more brand agnostic buyers now, that actually the Capri name is useful in that getting recognition, but people aren't so precious about it that they're going to be put off the car because it has a name that's associated with an older model. In my opinion, I think actually it's a better idea. You look at what other brands are doing, and you've got things like the BZ4X, the ENY1, and just this Scrabble bag of nonsense that nobody can remember. Nobody's going to have any sort of connection with a car with that sort of a name. Whereas Capri, at least, it's a word for the start, and it's a word that people know. So I think actually, for all that there's been this kind of uproar now amongst petrol heads and nerds, I think long term it might well play in Ford's favour to have that sort of recognition there.
And also, I think the good thing that I did notice at Festival of Speed, when you've got all these cars, side by side, we all come into contact with various cars during the course of each week, etc. But you don't get to see en masse various brands. That we've almost moved away from, like, for example, I've currently got an Audi e-tron, which is basically an Audi Q7 with the internal combustion engine taken out and a motor put in, and the basically batteries put in the floor. We're actually going now for not bespoke, but cars that have been designed with batteries and electric technology at the forefront, and not as almost a retrofit. So there were some very interesting cars and some very interesting shapes. But you are right. Yes, the Capri does look like a Polestar. But the good thing as well is that I've currently got like I just said, an Audi e-tron, an original one. It's just about 3.5 years old. And you have got dealers at the moment, or manufacturers at the moment, falling over themselves to get you into new cars. So, for example, this offer is still running. So if people want to look, Lotus themselves, not via independent leasing companies, but Lotus themselves are underwriting the cost to get people into the new Electra model by a very, very large margin. Basically, you can currently get on a 3-year deal a Lotus Electra S, so 600 brake horsepower car, with an on-the-road purchase price of about £113,000. If you do 12,000 miles a year for about, I got it for mine is £560 a month, but they're now about 630 to the 700 mark. But still, half of what a similar Audi would cost. And definitely about 2/3 less than other leasing companies and what they were doing before. Lotus are doing this for 2 reasons. They originally started it because they needed to get rid of lots of cancelled orders, because the Lotus Electra being delayed a few times, lots of people had paid large deposits and whatever else, got bored and then gone off and got a Taycan or similar, whatever. But then they realised that actually this is quite a good thing, and familiarity breeds, etc., etc. The more you see these cars on the road, the more they become their own selling points, etc. So they've continued it. I understand it is finishing. It was supposed to finish at the end of June. They are quick Google search suggests that there are still offers available now, so maybe they're extending it a little bit longer. But it's definitely, if you're in the market for that sort of car and you want to save quite a lot of money, I would definitely recommend having a look at Lotus.
It is an intriguing prospect that you can get a 600 horsepower Lotus for about the same money as, I mean, I'm sure in a Barth 500e is about £600 a month in leasing at the minute. It's just, it's wild.
And that's where the joys of, Lotus being owned by the Geely Group does mean they've got, they can flex their muscles and,
Yeah.
basically to get people in the cars, they can throw some money at it and discount it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, on the subject of new cars and what you can and can't have, the news came out this week that, of course, Jaguar, who are going to be an all-electric brand by 2026, I think is the plan, are going to stop selling their only electric car later this year. They basically looked at the numbers, decided that the I-Pace doesn't make them any money, and so it's being binned along with pretty much every other Jaguar that they currently sell. So I think from later this year, we're going to only be able to buy the petrol-powered F-Pace, which is a bit of a shame because I drove the I-Pace fairly recently. Actually, it's a great little car, big car. It's a decent thing. It's actually in the vein of Lotus. It's pretty quick. It's fun to drive, but it never really had the investment that I think it deserved, and it clearly wasn't selling enough numbers for JLR to keep it going. It's a bit of a shame because it was fairly groundbreaking. It was out there before Audi had anything, before BMW and Mercedes had anything similar. It just seems to have been left standing in the last few years.
It was interesting, just on that, Ian Cullen's new car was actually pride of place within the Electric Avenue at Festival of Speed as well at Sky. So that's an interesting, sort of two-seater, sporty, quite high up, a little bit sort of extreme Paris-Dakar type look about it. But yeah, definitely caught people's attention. And also that was just in silver. Most of the other cars along there were orange, and Genesis. The whole Genesis stand was orange. Any car, any color in orange.
Yeah,
it was actually interesting. The Genesis Magma. It was a road car. It was designed for the road. It wasn't a prototype. It must have the stiffest suspension known to man, because I couldn't get my finger between the tyre and the wheel arch.
That'll make it interesting for throwing around here then.
Yeah.
I'm interested by that Magma because they've been quite coy about what the technical details are, but we know it's based on the same platform as the Ioniq 5N. And obviously the existing GV60 is quite quick, but it's not particularly interesting to drive. It's fast in a straight line, fine in corners. But it'll be interesting to see how much of what they've done to the Ioniq N creeps into the Magma Genesis cars. It could be, potentially could be a good thing for the brand.
So after spending last weekend at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, surrounded by Formula One cars, electric cars, cars of all shapes and sizes, I'm spending this weekend, just for a change, at the season 10 finale of Formula E in London. And unlike Formula One, there's actually 7 drivers that could actually win the thing. So you've got, the 2 drivers from Jaguar, Nick Cassidy, Mitch Evans, currently 1-2. Then you've got the 2 tableware Porsche drivers, Pascal Fairline, Anthony Felix da Costa. You've then got the lone wolf of Nissan's Oliver Rowland. Then you've got John Eric Verne from DS Automobiles and Penske, Jake Dennis from Andretti, and then Maximilian Günther from Maserati. They're all pretty much in contention. Obviously, being British, you'd like to see, British, you've got 2 hats, because obviously you'd like to see Jaguar bring it home, either Nick Cassidy or Mitch Evans, or Oliver Rowland and Jake Dennis actually do it. So it's set up for exciting doubleheader at Excel. Excel, as listeners may or may not know, is a very odd track. It's the only track on the tour where drivers actually drive inside and outside, because obviously being electric vehicles, there's no emissions, there's no issues with driving a car inside. So yeah, they actually the pit lanes are actually inside Excel. and some of it, and then obviously like the track goes outside and then back in again. So it's interesting. It's a little bit like Monaco because it's lights on, lights off, not the vehicles, but you know, that instant second or so adjustment when they come in and out. But it does lead to good racing. It's a tight circuit. There's usually lots of crashes, so we shall see. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting weekend.
Yeah.
And the other big news in motorsport, and you know, we'll have to decide how EV Power does end up covering this, because Extreme E, obviously the sister to Formula E, and the E1 series in boating, is actually going to become Extreme H. So they're ditching electric. Well, they're not ditching electric, but I'll explain. Basically, it's going to become extreme hydrogen. And you're going to have hydrogen cells actually then create, they're not going to be driving on hydrogen like an internal combustion engine, but the hydrogen will actually, the fuel cells will then generate the electricity for the car. So it's broadly a hybrid in so much, but it's not petrol or diesel hybrid. It's pure nothing out the tailpipe with hydrogen. I think that's a very interesting, very exciting time. There are potentially going to be hydrogen being used in motorsport, but in a different way. You know, in the same way that you know, JCB actually use hydrogen to power all of their heavy plant machinery, because you know, electric it isn't appropriate for heavy plant machinery and things on building sites where they're running 24/7 or whatever else in shifts or no ability to charge. And so I think it's an exciting time. They demoed the Extreme H car at Scotland.
Just
and
down the road from me while I was in another country, which was handy.
And it seemed to do very well at the hands of the Red Bull driver. So yeah, we should just have to, you know, wait and see really what happens on that one.
It'll be interesting to see, because as you see, some motorsports are already looking at combustion hydrogen. I know Toyota have been running one of their rally cars on hydrogen combustion, but even they seem to think that it's going to be exclusively for motorsport. It's not something they see, certainly in the medium term, for passenger vehicles or anything. It's going to be a sport thing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Extreme H goes. And just for all that it's a bit of a shame to see it shifting away from an electric drive, purely a battery electric. It's interesting to see motorsport exploring these different avenues of zero emissions, power. And this, the hydrogen fuel cell, I guess, another one where there are questions over how easy and how sustainable it is for road transport. But for motorsport, I think it's all the good just to have all these options and just for it to be exploring. And I think one way or another, it all eventually feeds back into the broader transport system as well. So it's all good.
I mean, Rowan Atkinson was at Goodwood Festival of Speed with his fully hydrogen Toyota Yaris GR. You know, that isn't using fuel cell, that is using hydrogen as a combustible. But yeah, you know, he loved it, said it was, you know, really responsive and the future. And this comes from someone that, you know, was at the forefront of electric cars and then turned his back on them quite publicly. Was blamed by the mainstream media for, you know, a single-handedly downturn in global electric car sales, which clearly he wasn't. But there we go. It's a cross that I'm sure he bears with pride. So there we go. I think, Matt, it's now time to play out the interview that I did whilst you were away, recorded just prior to the Silverstone Grand Prix with David Richards. So David is chairman of Prodrive, responsible for many cars, the initial Extreme E cars, for example, as well as other electric cars. But also he's chairman of the British Motorsports, or British Motorsport UK. So I got to ask him a few questions, and it was interesting, his take on various things. And I mean, Matt, you know, British motorsport, or the Formula One, but British motorsport within that, the pinnacle of motorsport, seems to be in a rich vein at the moment. You know, you've got Lando Norris, you know, whose father Adam is the gliding force behind pure scooters. You know, unlike Formula E, there's not 7 drivers all vying. However, the top drivers at the moment do appear all to be British.
I think it's a nice position to be in that we suddenly have, well, not suddenly, but we have this, as you say, rich representation of the UK at the very pinnacle of motorsport.
And I think whilst it's pretty much guaranteed that Max Verstappen will win the Drivers' Championship this year, we do have British competition, albeit one being German owned, but Mercedes based at Brackley and Brixworth, and McLaren based at the MTC in Surrey, are really hot on the heels of Red Bull, and it could be an interesting time. Post the summer break, if Checo doesn't get the points needed. Firstly, he could be checking out. Dr. Helmut Marko could be giving him his exit ticket, possibly with Daniel Ricciardo coming in or another Liam Lawson coming in to replace him. But also, there could be other changes in Formula One as well. Adrian Newey. Arguably, once Adrian designed a car, and I did get to see RB17 at the weekend as well at Festival of Speed, which looked very similar to an Aston Martin Valkyrie for some reason. But anyway, if Adrian does turn his back on the prancing horse, which seems to be the talk at the moment, he's not going to go to Ferrari. Possibly, the rumours not helped by the fact that his school chum, a certain Jeremy Clarkson, told French media that Adrian is looking to buy a house in Oxford and not in Maranello. I don't know how true that is. Maybe Jeremy's just trying to boost the house prices in the Cotswolds. But it does look like he's probably going to go to either Williams or McLaren. I think that could be an interesting turn of fortune.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially for Williams, they've been struggling for a while. So, yeah, having a brain like Newey's there could have a real impact, I suppose.
Absolutely, and Williams, do have the financial support that they never had in the past. A very competent and technical team principal in James Vowles as well. So, we can only just see. Okay, without further ado, let's play the David Richards interview, and then we'll come back and round up and tell you what we've got planned next week. I'm pleased to be joined today by David Richards, CBE. David's gone from being a former rally driver 40 odd years ago to now being chairman of Prodrive and chairman of Motorsports UK. David, welcome. And could you just give a bit of background to what happened in the 40 years between the 2 points?
Well, that's looking back, it's a long period of time, isn't it? No, I was very fortunate. I was studying articles as a chartered accountant and ended up going rallying and quite successfully, and won the world championship with a Finnish driver, Ari Vatanen, in '81, and then started my own business as Prodrive. We started off to do a rally team. We were that led us into sports car racing, into touring car racing, into all sorts of other activities, Formula One for a period of time, and more lately diversifying into other automotive and non-automotive engineering fields as well. So today we employ about 700 people in Banbury and Milton Keynes, and it's a very diverse organisation, albeit motorsport's still at the heart of it.
Talking about motorsport being at the heart of it, also, regardless of you're obviously chairman of Prodrive, you're also chairman of Motorsports UK, the governing body of the British motorsports. Could you just sort of give a bit of background to where you think we are with motorsports in the UK at the moment? F1 is obviously a very rich vein at the moment, but that just merely scratches the surface of the many other elements to British motorsport.
Well, I guess motorsport to a certain extent reflects the economy of the country, because it's a discretionary activity for people. It's not cheap by any means. But I would say at a grassroots level, it's very robust at present. And it's helped by the profile of Formula One and other motorsport activities. But a lot of people coming in and participating at the grassroots level. And I see the responsibility of Motorsport UK, our role. We don't need to interfere in the likes of Formula One or World Rally Championship or any of the professional sports, other than to sort of act as a regulator for them, and which we do, I believe, very well. Our role is really to promote the sport and make it more accessible to people. So, young people have the opportunity to experience motorsport at an early age, and then can carry on. And who knows, we might find another Lewis Hamilton amongst them.
Excellent. It would be remiss of me, given that the podcast is called EV Powered, if we didn't really sort of try to focus a little as much as we can on electric vehicles in motorsports. So, how do you see motorsports evolving with more and more electric vehicles coming on stream?
Well, it's one category of motorsport. It's not sort of the exclusion of everybody else. And of course, historic cars, and a lot of motorsport is around historic racing and sort of from earlier years. Those cars are going to remain for a long time to come. So we're still going to have those cars. So I look at it in a more general way. We have to make motorsport far more sustainable for the long term, which means it has to be responsible in terms of its environmental credentials. And we're doing lots of things around that. So it's, you talk about electric vehicles. That's only one aspect. Sustainable fuel, another important aspect. And if we're going to have internal combustion engines for many, many years to come, certainly in motorsport we are, then moving them across to sustainable fuel is the first point that we can do. In my own company, in Prodrive, we've run sustainable fuels on our cars for the last 3 years. So there's no reason why we can't do it. It's a little more expensive for the participants, but it's worth paying for, and I believe so. But then going to the electric vehicles, clearly the opportunity for motorsport is to promote new forms of transport, if you like, or electric vehicles being one of them, to the public at large on behalf of the car manufacturers. So I think people tend to look at electric vehicles and think, well, they're already they're sort of okay around town. They don't necessarily look at them as a performance vehicle. So motorsport can certainly add to those credentials. Formula E does it extremely well. In the single-seater formula, there are more touring cars and other activities coming on stream as well to promote electric vehicles. So motorsport can be used as a platform to promote technology. And if you look back 50 years, and you'll see that's what it did. It promoted new technologies across the board. And that saying, sort of, win on Sunday, sell on Monday, was a sort of car manufacturers. That's why they invested in motorsport. I think we've lost it a little bit in the last 50 years. I think we've focused more on the entertainment value of motorsport, certainly on TV, certainly for that side of it. And in doing so, we've neglected the technology advances that motorsport has historically promoted. And we've got to get back to that. And we've got to be there developing new technologies, looking at where the car manufacturers want to promote ideas for the future, and motorsport's a wonderful platform for doing that.
It's funny you say that, drive on the Sunday, sell on the Monday. Aston Martin, which you were previously chairman of, I heard a stat recently from Lawrence Stroll. Basically, I think they were saying that the F1 races where the Aston Martin safety car is deployed, they see a huge uplift of people actually going on the configurator on their website with a view to potentially purchasing one on the Sunday evening or the Monday.
Good. Well, there you go. That's it proves the point, rather.
Also, Formula E, you touched upon there. It's seen quite a lot of trickle down of some of the technology. Jaguar of the I-Pace, etc. Has quite a lot of battery technology has evolved from Formula E. Do you see that coming across, obviously, with work you do with Prodrive as well? Some of the technology being used in rally cars or other series actually entering then into road cars?
It does, but a lot of this technology is very hidden, if you like. It's sort of, it might be increasing the performance of a battery by 10% or 15%, which is great for the consumer and benefits the consumer, but it's not something that's sort of immediately apparent. So it comes from development through motorsport on the track, and there are lots of hidden benefits you can see from that. Unfortunately, with Formula E, to start with, there was very little freedom of the technology. So the cars were all identical, the motors were identical, the batteries were identical. But as it's evolving now, it's becoming freer and freer, allowing car manufacturers to come in and develop their own powertrains, which will naturally transfer onto road cars.
Just talking about sustainability, Formula One have their net zero campaign. Where is Motorsport UK with regard to looking to do a net zero, or what are we talking about sustainability wise with regard to Motorsport UK?
Well, we're working on a raft of initiatives, and just by going back to my own company, Prodrive, we are working towards the ISO standard for sustainability, which I'm confident we will achieve by the end of this year. The roof of our building, if anyone passes on the N40 and sees the Prodrive name there, they'll see the roof of the building has 2 football pitches of solar cells on the top. And Motorsport UK is no different. We're looking at all the circuits, all the motor clubs, and we're accrediting motor clubs with environmental credentials meeting certain criteria. So it's a starting point. It's a long way to go, but it's a clear commitment from us. And you know what? The more people I talk to out there in motorsport, the more they are fully aware of their responsibilities in this respect. And we have we're pushing against an open door. You have a group of people that realize that if we want to continue in motorsport, we must do it responsibly. We must find ways of achieving what we're trying to achieve in terms of environmental impact.
Prodrive's fully use of sustainable fuels, is that just literally a straight swap, or if you had to make substantial changes to the pipes and other parts of the engine?
You have to make some changes to it, and all these fuels require a different approach and different calibration for the engines. By way of example of that, I've got a couple of old cars, and I put the latest E10 fuel into them, and they didn't run particularly well, I have to say. So so you have to be a little cautious in that. But in motorsport terms, we have the capability to do that, and it shouldn't be a barrier at all.
Prodrive obviously celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. I mean, where do you see it going in the future? Are you looking for more collaborations, to work in more series, possibly introduce new ones?
It's more about diversity. We've got a very strong foothold in motorsport today. We represent Aston Martin with their GT racing around the world in terms of building all the GT cars in Banbury. We're just doing a new Dakar project for the Dacia car company. We're going to Paris-Dakar for the next few years. We're doing a lot of restorations of many of the old cars we've built over the last 40 years. So the motorsport side is very strong, very stable. What I'm looking to do is diversify the business into other areas, using that expertise that's been gained through motorsport, the culture that we've created within the organisation, to push the boundaries in other areas. We're doing a whole range of projects at the moment. We've got from the lightest folding bike in the world, which weighs 6.9 kilos, which we're marketing, through to building a last mile delivery vehicle that meets the latest legislation and actually transfers pallets, so you're actually very efficient. And worked on a number of trucks, electric versions of trucks, and working on a refrigeration unit for trucks now run by solar. So it doesn't stop. We're looking at all the time. We get new ideas coming forward and trying to push the boundaries.
Excellent. So you could even be working on the UK's version of the America's Cup.
We did that before. We've done that with Ben. We did the hydraulics and electrical system for Ben a few years ago. He's now partnered with Mercedes, so we don't have that opportunity.
What other companies, you obviously mentioned Aston Martin there, what other companies does Prodrive actually work with or partner with?
Well, many of these companies, as you might imagine, we act as a sort of technical partner behind the scenes, and we can't boast about it or even tell anybody about it, which is slightly unfortunate. But there'll be, I would think there are very few car manufacturers around the world that we haven't worked with at some point in time, and more so recently in aviation as well, aerospace.
So Prodrive is definitely the drive, or the pro behind the drive.
That's a good way of putting it. But I think that's why people come and join us, and we get lots of great young engineers join the company, because they know that they might be working on a motorsport program one day, they'll be working on an environmental project the next day, an electric car the day afterwards. So,
on a sort of personal note, what excites you and it sort of motivates you every day to keep going and keep evolving?
It's just that excitement of what's around the corner next, and what we can turn our hand to, and how we can build a company based upon solid foundations that sort of works in ethical way, and whether it's environmental issues or our employment standards or winning on the racetrack. It's just a fun business to be part of. I must admit, there are not many days I don't leap out of bed in the morning thinking, God, what's ahead of us today?
Excellent. Wearing your Motorsport UK chairman hat for a second, Abby Pulling last weekend was the first female to win a Formula 4 series. Where do you see the progression of women in motorsports generally? Not in F1 necessarily. I mean, obviously that would be the pinnacle, but you know, what is the percentage at the moment of female license holders, for example, and is it growing?
Well, it's not enough. That's the first thing to say. You know, we're in a society of 50% females. We have a very low representation and participation in motorsport. But you know, and you look at other sports, it's only of late that sort of female football has become so popular. So we're working at and introducing new female drivers. There's some great initiatives going out there. Susie Wood's got a great one there, which is pulling forward young female drivers. And we today, I guess around 8% of our license holders are female, which is obviously too low. We need to encourage that. But for me, it's more of a societal thing. You know, they're getting young girls at an early age to think in the same way that they want to participate sort of in motorsport in the same way that boys do. It's how we treat girls in kindergartens, and if you treat them the same as the boys and give them the same opportunities, that will follow in due course. And I've sort of said I'm hopeful that my 3-year-old granddaughter might be one of the first of the next generation that will benefit from all these changes.
Excellent. You also wear another hat, so to speak, in so much as you've actually got a hotel.
Yes. You know, people ask me, you know, why has that happened? I point the finger at my wife for saying it was her idea. But they also, I'm often asked the question, what's the most difficult, you know, business you've ever run in your life? What's the sort of biggest challenge you've ever faced? And they assume it was running a Formula One team. Formula One teams are pretty challenging. There are a lot of people involved. There's a lot of focus on you, the whole eyes of the world on you. But I can honestly tell you, it's not. It's running a small hotel in Cornwall, which I don't actually run myself. I have to say, we have a general manager there. But I see the challenges that he faces every day of the week, and I would far rather be running a Formula One team than a hotel.
Do you think Ross Brawn was saying it was one of the hardest jobs that he'd ever done was lying? He needs to buy a hotel.
I'm having dinner with Ross tonight, so I'll mention that to him.
Excellent. Also, just a sort of final point. Where do you see motorsport actually evolving to as we move on? You know, you said, you know, cost of living crisis, and you know, motorsport is regarded as broadly as a luxury, less a pursuit. Do you think it's going to grow and thrive over the next sort of 5 years, or do you think it'll sort of just wallow around a little bit?
No, I think the opportunity for us is to promote these new technologies, to be used as a platform for developing new technologies and promoting them to the public at large. And we've got to embrace this. We've got to find ways of incorporating new championships within the overall offering that motorsport does. There's we talked about Formula E. There's a hydrogen series coming very shortly now. So all these things are starting. And whilst we remain relevant, whilst we also remain conscious of our role in sort of environmental side, we will have a strong future. If we miss those things, if we actually ignore those things, we'll just end up, you know, sort of like, I don't know, fox hunting. So we've got to think about things really consciously and make conscious efforts to do the right thing.
Would you like to see like an additional UK-based series, a little bit like the Next Gen Cup, where they've just, you know, the electrified middies and things like that for early and entry point, fairly low cost series to electrified racing?
Well, there's lots of opportunities to come in at an early age now. We have a series of Motorsport UK called Streetcar. Join your local motor club, and there are a whole range. People assume, because they watch Formula One, they assume you've got to have a bag full of money and a car like Lewis Hamilton to get involved in motorsport. That's not the case. You can join your local motor club, you can come along with your standard road car, and you can participate on a wide range of motorsport activities, which are just great fun, and you'll meet like-minded people. And that is the role of Motorsport UK, to develop that base of the pyramid, to expose people to the opportunity for motorsport at an early age, to just enjoy it. And most people, 99% of our license holders, are there just to have fun, to enjoy life with like-minded people and have a bit of fun. And that's what we're there to do.
David, I think on that note, thank you for your time today, and let's hope that both Prodrive and Motorsport in the UK go from strength to strength.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Thank you.
Right, and let's thank Dave for his time today. And I think we can all agree that EVs will definitely form part of an evolving motorsport project. Most probably some of the heritage cars won't be re-engineered. They'll just use sustainable fuels, paddy loads, pure or zero, etc., are probably going to come to the forefront. So they're quite expensive at the moment. It will be interesting at the Goodwood Revival to see all of the classic cars and heritage cars that are going to be driven there will all be using sustainable fuel. The whole thing is being run 100% on sustainable fuel. So whilst not being electric, still it should be encouraged and embraced for zero emissions from the tailpipe. So there we go. So I think this week, once I come back from Formula E, I'm actually going to go to the Farnborough International Air Show over a couple of days, because there's various things, various people are doing some launches. But the biggest number of announcements and the whole raft of announcements is going to be from companies launching EV tolls, which are electric vehicle takeoff and landing aircraft, i.e. effectively cars with drones on the roof. It's been talked about for years. Back to the Future featured them. God, in what, 86 or something, whenever it was, something like that.
A long time ago.
But we're finally getting there. Uber have been talking about launching, these kind of vehicles as cabs, etc., or mini cabs and stuff like that as well. So it'll be good just to see how many there are, where they are in their launch program and process, and how close we are from actually seeing them on the streets, in the air, and also where we are with regard to regulatory approval as well, because it's all great that all these these wizards have got all these ideas, and X model is going to come out next week, or we're ready to launch it in a year's time. But if the FIA, CAA, or whoever basically say don't think so, we got too many or whatever, then they're gonna just die. So just see what happens.
It's interesting. This is, we've always just been just around the corner from having them, haven't we? And I think the process seems to be, there definitely seem to be more of them around that are actually close to finished products that we've maybe seen. But as you say, it's how the regulators view it and whether they think that having various little things floating about in air is a good idea or not. But it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the show, kind of what there is around there. In sharp contrast, I'm going to keep my feet firmly on the ground. I'm off to Woburn Safari Park next week, not for a family day out, but I'm going to be testing the entry level and the range topping versions of the new Nissan Ariya. So that'll be a day out, hopefully in the sunshine.
Excellent. I think without further ado, thank you for listening today. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll be back with another edition next week, we promise, in this new format. So speak to you then.
You can find more episodes of the Everything EV podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.